The first barrier to helping anybody is to get them to tell you about it. If you work in an organisation whereby vulnerabilities are preyed upon, then no one's going to talk about it. They're going to hide it. If you work in an organisation where the chief exec is saying, I've got dyslexia, I'm rubbish at spelling, don't judge me on it, then they're going to feel much more comfortable themselves, you know. So it starts at the top.
Hello and welcome to Working to Work, a neurodivergent journey through employment. Welcome to listeners on Resonance FM, welcome to people watching on YouTube, and welcome to people listening on the podcast feed. This episode is the second part of my interview with Nanette Mellor, who is a charity CEO who's worked at the Brain charity, Mencap, Drake Music, and is now a consultant with the ADHD Foundation. And I wanted to talk with Nanette again because there was a lot that I wanted to get to in the first episode that I didn't because we kind of diverged into other topics of interest for us both, particularly around education. In this episode, we really drilled down on some of the key aspects of the paper that inspired me to talk with Nanette, which was about, the interview, sorry. It's called Neurodiversity in the Workplace, and she gave it to Eric Pines. I'll link it in the description. So effectively, we looked at two key aspects of work: obtaining work, and then when in work, how one might find themselves in a role that they find gratifying, aligned with their strengths, and in an organization that they feel comfortable in. So within that, we spoke about challenges in regards to interviews and strategies to mitigate them. We spoke about biases in the hiring process. And when I was thinking about this, just for a bit of context, we didn't touch on this actually in the interview, but I was thinking of some aspects that maybe autistic people might experience, for instance, in respect of body language. So some autistic people, including myself, at times find it challenging to make eye contact when uncomfortable, and in society this is sometimes seen as a sign that one isn't engaged or they're dishonest, but this isn't necessarily the case. So kind of what I was looking at in terms of bias was one imposing their sense of what body language means on to someone else, and thus that impacting their chance of obtaining that role. But Nanette spoke about other aspects that I think are equally interesting. We spoke about the bias of algorithms, and we also talked about certain ideas like job tailoring. So if someone doesn't have necessarily all the skills necessary for a role, but the employer can see that they're capable and can offer a lot, and maybe offer skills that weren't necessarily aligned with the role that they were applying for, but could benefit the organisation, giving that person a chance and tailoring a job to meet their strengths. And again, Nanette, as a charity CEO, someone that's hired a lot of people, someone that's created and set a culture, is an informed and insightful person to speak to about this type of topic. Also in this article, Once in Employment, Nanette spoke about job carving, what that is, how potentially if someone isn't as good at a certain aspect or isn't capable potentially of performing a certain role, how the roles can be carved up to mean that each employee is doing the roles that both or has the responsibilities that they both enjoy and are capable of doing. In a wider sense, we spoke about creating neuro-inclusive workspaces, and within that, like maybe what some legacy policies of convention that don't necessarily need to be maintained, and creating basically an inclusive work culture. And within all of these topics, I asked Nanette to give practical examples where some of these practices have been implemented, which I think is especially helpful. Please do subscribe if you're listening or watching on YouTube or the podcast feed, because that helps you know when new episodes come out, and I hope also boosts the reach of the project at large, which will help it to actually have impact. And if you are listening on Resonance, please look at the Working to Work YouTube channel. It's difficult to find, but if you maybe search one of the guests' name and Working to Work, you should be able to stumble across it. And feel free to share, because again, sharing, I feel, will help expand the reach. So thank you. And now the interview. Nanette, thank you again for joining me. I appreciate it. There were things I wanted to talk to you about, but our conversation was so enjoyable that we expanded last time. Again, grateful that we've got this opportunity to touch on some aspects of neurodivergent work that we didn't last time. For those that maybe haven't heard that episode, I wonder if you can just introduce yourself, what you've done, what you're about, what you're doing.
I am essentially a disability and neurodiversity specialist. Some of my roles have included campaigning roles at National Mencap. I then went on to be the CEO of the Brain Charity, the CEO of Drake Music, which is an organisation that supports disabled musicians. And I'm currently working as a consultant with the ADHD Foundation. So I would say I'm a neurodiversity specialist, and part of that whole movement that is there to drive forward equality for people who are neurodivergent.
And just quickly, for those that don't know, what does the Brain Charity do? What's their kind of purpose?
So the Brain Charity is a national organisation. It supports individuals with any neurological difference or neurological issues. So the Brain Charity will support people who have autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, but also people who have brain tumour, brain injury, all of the neurological diseases. Again, that's very much social care based. So the work is focused on helping people with practical issues like work, with emotional issues, having to go through life with something like that is very difficult, as you can imagine, and also with the social side, which can, be really challenging for a lot of people. So that organisation works in those three key areas, and does an amazing job, and can offer all sorts of different areas of support. So, I would encourage anybody that's struggling to go and have a look at the website and what's on offer there. It's great. So
today I want to touch on support and initiatives that you've been involved with in terms of both facilitating, supporting people into work, and then helping them thrive when in work. For those that didn't hear the previous episode, Nanette gave a great interview about Nanette's experience with neurodiversity in the workplace. And what I particularly liked about that article were the practical examples of some of the initiatives. So starting with acquiring work, helping support people, neurodivergent people into work. From your experience, and from talking to neurodivergent people, what are some of the challenges that you've seen neurodivergent people experience during job interviews, and what strategies have you identified work in terms of supporting them with those challenges?
Just to start with, job interviews are a really bizarre, unhelpful, and not very successful construct that we've got, that we use when we're trying to find the right people to join our team. We've got this sort of standardized, I sit behind a table, perhaps with somebody else, sometimes with another person as well, and then you walk in from the door and we shake hands, you sit down, and then you perform for us for maybe 40 minutes. We've got these standard questions, and then we judge you afterwards. And we judge you against the other candidates. And it seems to me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there now, that not everybody is going to do well in that format. Say if we're trying to recruit an IT professional, maybe a software developer. This is an individual who may never have to perform in that way, like you would at an interview, in their role ever. They're never going to have to do that. That person's role is about working on the computer, being able to code, being able to be really, really technically brilliant. But what we're judging them on, the interview, is how good they are at verbal communication, how good they are at pulling their memories, forward to discuss them in a kind of story-based format. There's all of these things that we look for in an interview. And I got sent on interview training when I was in my 30s because I'd gone for an interview and I'd done really badly in it. And my boss, who wanted me to do well and knew I was capable, couldn't believe I hadn't got this role compared to the person that had. The person that got it was a much better interviewee. So I went on the training and, got taught all about how to answer a question properly and, all about going in there with ready-made stories and things like that. And because I can act, then I knew what they wanted. I went in and I did it and I got the job and I'm quite successful now in interviews. So I'm just saying that really to highlight the fact that interviews are a performance and they aren't going to help you get the right candidate unless the job is about performing, like a sales role or a teaching role or, one of those roles that involves that kind of activity. So to start off with, I would say, do you want to do an interview? And if you do want to do an interview, you can make that as casual as you like. You can make that happen over a cup of tea, in a cafe, in a public place, or you can do it online. You can do it with one person, 2 people, or 3 people. You can really mix that up. And I think one of the key groups of people I would be thinking about will be those with social anxiety, which is very, very common for people with autism. And, to put somebody with autism through that kind of process can be very, very stressful. And so, you really need to think about that. One of my best acquisitions, one of my best team players that I ever recruited, he didn't have an interview because I was made aware in advance that he had social anxiety. We just met and had a chat, and I looked at his CV, and his CV told me everything I needed to know. It told me that, this was a really bright individual. This was someone who worked really hard. And this was somebody who liked to research and liked to write. And that's what I was looking for, because I was after somebody who was going to write grant applications for me. And I could see all that from their CV. And when I met them, I didn't really get to see much of their personality because they were frightened. And so, they weren't very open. But you can do work trials. You've got probations, you've got things like that. If you've got an inkling somebody's going to be good at something, you need to do your best to try and get them in, because they're going to be a good thing for you to have. So don't put something like an interview in the way, because they're really not helpful. Some candidates have asked for the questions in advance, which is absolutely fine. Again, though, you can end up with a bit of a performance then. People will come in and they will perform the answer. And, that again, it doesn't really show you who they are. One of the key things I always do when I'm interviewing, if I choose to interview, is to try and get people to relax at the start. That's really key. And I think, everyone should do that anyway. And just say to them, we know you've got the qualifications. We know you do well. We can see it all here on your application, on your CV. I want to get to know you now. So just try and be yourself. I always say that. It's an easy thing to say. But yeah, I think that the whole interview process doesn't need to take place. There's no rule that says you have to do interviews. You can do work trials. You can ask that person to come in and do a couple of weeks' work, and you can pay them to do that. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Or you can start to job carve at that point, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
I just wanted to offer a few thoughts quickly on my own experience. I recently had a job interview, relatively recently, and asked for the questions in advance, and actually found that really, really useful. And but when answering the questions, I got a sense a bit of what you're saying there. That it becomes a bit of performance, but from my perspective, it was a performance that was based in authenticity. Like I was answering the questions um, in a way that I felt, well, this is truly what I want to say, and I've been able to think about it, and I am expressing myself, uh, who actually I am, as opposed to if I just get the questions ad hoc and I can't think of the answers as quickly, and I can't recall like the actual specific examples that not just demonstrate I'm good for the role, but fundamentally who I am. And then the feedback I got from that interview was, yeah, you answered the questions really well. It was very aligned. Like we got a sense of who you were, and it felt like I was cheating somehow, but it wasn't. I felt I was really put on a, again, that's about equity. It's not an advantage. I think it put me on a level with those that I imagine everyone gets nervous, but a level where I can recall quickly and kind of align with like what are the things actually that speak to this experience and that.
And I think it's important to think about the question. So, different questions are there to help you as the organisation find out about this person. Some of the questions are about finding out about that person's personality. I think it's perfectly acceptable to give those kind of questions in advance. Like you say, it gives you time to think about what you want to say. There are other questions that are about testing somebody's technical ability or their knowledge of the sector, their knowledge of the subject matter. And that is problematic because when you give that question in advance, it gives the candidate the opportunity to go and find the answer online. But again, perhaps if you want to test somebody's technical skills, somebody's knowledge of the sector, an interview isn't the right place to do that anyway, because all you're doing is testing the person's memory. A software developer might be able to sit there and talk to you, at length about how they code, but they might not be able to do that. They might be able to code, but they might not be able to communicate verbally that they can do that. So because we've got this standardized system of asking questions in this format, it's not that helpful.
Just to clarify with in that interview, I mean, I had notes on a Kindle that I was referencing. So my working memory is poor. So even if I knew the questions in advance and thought about the answers, I might forget them in just a normal situation and probably even more in a pressurized situation. So I had the notes, but it wasn't cheating because it's just a reminder and it's a crux for me to allow me to be able to do that to the best of my ability. And in my experience in audio production and working at a tech company, both of those roles a lot of the time do actually offer a practical test, so code this, and we want to basically see how you work it out, but you don't see your workings, but we don't need to hear you necessarily articulate it. But yeah, sometimes coupled with those, especially in the audio production world, there is a social aspect to it and a way of like speaking to who you are that can feel inaccessible, I think, and mean that one doesn't potentially get opportunities they're qualified for and would be a good fit for. In the instance where this person that you said was a great hire had mentioned, or you found out that they've suffered from social anxiety in certain situations, you supported that. You found a way to enable them to still apply for the job. Did that information come to you firsthand from them? Do you think? Because I think that's probably quite rare that like an applicant reaches out and says like I find it myself anxious in these situations. Is there something that can be done to mitigate it?
I think it probably is rare in a lot of other people's worlds, but in my world, I think it became very well known that the Brain Charity, which is where that happened, was a recruiter of people who face barriers to work, and we were very proud of that. And what I really wanted to do was build a team of people that face barriers to work who were overachievers in order to be able to speak with confidence when we went out to the rest of the world to say, you can do this, this works really well.
I wonder if the way some of the wording is for applicants to ask for what they need feels that not applicable to them. It's not a kind of physical accessibility issue, or it's like more context for who's going to be there, what's the setup going to be, how long is it going to be, like I think those kind of things where you know what you're walking into and you're kind of prepared in a similar way environmentally as you are kind of in terms of like what you might want to say and offer is equally helpful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organisations have started to do that. They're giving the interview dates and times well in advance, obviously for people's diaries, but also to help people start preparing psychologically for what's about to happen. I would say if you're the candidate, ask to go and see the room in advance. You can do that. A good employer will be happy with that. So you get a sense of what the atmosphere is going to be like in the building, what the building's like, where you might be sitting, all those things. You can do that as well. I believe that if you, as a neuro-divergent person, apply for a role and no changes are put in place for you, it's probably not the kind of place you want to work anyway, So don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. Go and find someone who's nice to work for. But yeah, for those of us that are out there trying to change these systems, have a think about why these rules are in place, because they might just be a traditional thing that there's no point to really, and you can change it if you want to. And if somebody wants to come and see the room in advance, fine. They want the questions in advance, fine. You can do all of those things. They're all within your power.
And cheap. They don't cost really that much money. So I wanted to speak a bit about the potential biases in hiring processes. When I think about hiring, a lot of the time it's, as we've talked about, communication and a certain communication style being like favored in terms of interviews, but also there's this idea of like team fit or culture fit. So people basically wanting to hire someone that they see as a good fit for the company, and often a good fit means they kind of, from my perspective, conform to the sensibilities of the majority of people there, as opposed to a good fit being like maybe at the Brain charity, it's that, okay, this person is talented at what they do, they want to do this job, and they add something that makes us more dynamic because they're different to who else we have. I wonder if you've witnessed what you might consider potential biases in hiring processes for yourself or while you've been hiring, and what kind of initiatives or ways of shifting those can create a more equitable environment for neurodivergent applicants.
Yeah, I mean, if you go on any good leadership course, they will tell you not to recruit people in your own light, because that is what you will do naturally. You will recruit people who you align to and feel comfortable with, and who look a bit like you, talk a bit like you, have the same background as you. And that's really the last thing you ought to be doing. You've got what you've got. You need people that have got what you haven't got. You need people who think differently to the way that you think, because then you've got more tools, you've got more experiences, you've got more different types of perceptions, you've got different viewpoints, you've got all of this stuff that you can use. If everyone's like you, you've just got loads of the same. Looking at the recruitment processes, they change all the time actually, and at the moment, if you're going for a CEO role, nowadays you'll be going through a recruitment agency. So a lot of CEO roles aren't advertised, they go through recruitment companies. And so you have to get through them first, and they have their own kind of biases. And then if you get through that kind of vetting process, then you will go on to the next stage. And one of the key services that the recruitment companies are offering the board of trustees or whoever is hiring, anonymity. They're offering them that, and they're protecting them from having to give unsuccessful candidates the bad news. So there's a depersonalization of the process that's gone on. And what you're finding at the moment for exec roles, senior manager roles, is that you have to try and penetrate all of that with your written word. So there's no verbal communication at the start at all, and it doesn't really happen until the very end of the process. And you are asked at the moment to have CVs, application forms, and often now written answers to questions. So they'll give you a lot of questions in advance as well. And you have to answer them on paper and then send them in. So I'm a dyslexic person, and a lot of leaders are dyslexic. And so for me, the creation of this sort of process now, it's really not good news for the organisations, never mind for people like me, because dyslexics often have performance skills, are very sociable, can communicate well, and that's what you want in a lot of leaders, because they've got these outward-facing roles. So, that process that's been put in place has probably been put in place by somebody who is quite academic and, is a good writer. And, and I think, so there are lots and lots of biases within recruitment. And this depersonalisation that's happening at the moment, you see it in big organisations as well that have HR teams. They'll say, we'll take this recruitment on. You, the manager, you don't have to deal with any of the bad stuff. We'll do all of that. It really gets in the way of getting to know your candidate, finding out who they really are, what makes them tick and what they're good at. So yeah, it's there, it's rife, and in some areas it's growing, and it's getting even more unhelpful.
And I guess now as well, there's technology used to do some initial sifting of applicants as well. So if you don't have awareness of like what an algorithm is going to use to cut people, then you can't even not blame it. You can blame the human that programmed that effectively. But so you have to have that awareness that really that system exists and to get through. And that's again about using very specific language, which not everyone knows or comes naturally, or the knowledge of is particularly useful in their the work that they would be doing. So it feels like this is why the project's working to work, in a sense. It's like its own job to understand how to get the job. If those things don't come intuitively to you, if you're not hip to like whatever technology is being used or processes are being used, and if you haven't had a ton of employment experience because you've had these challenges obtaining work, then you're even more at a disadvantage because you just don't have that lived experience of going through those processes. I think greater transparency for how these things are working would be one kind of initiative that could create more of an equitable platform.
Yeah. And I mean, when you're talking about algorithms, then you're talking about all sorts of problematic scenarios. When I was at Drake Music, I was talking to a chap that ran a local recording studio, and he was talking to me about one of his young artists who was a black woman, and she constantly came up on the R&B feeds of the big music platforms, even though she was a rock artist. And it was because the algorithms were looking at the images of her, and she had a black face, so she was put in the R&B pile. There'll be prejudices within those algorithms that are prejudice against race, class, sex, and of course, neuro.
I mean, beyond like that being like frustrating and pretty racist, there's a real disadvantage to that person, because presumably they want to get their music to people that like rock, the type of rock music they're making, as opposed to R&B, that people might find the music and then it's like, this isn't my thing, and that's to their disadvantage.
That's it.
So in the article that I've referenced before, you spoke about job tailoring a bit, and that as a way to kind of leverage individual strengths and of the applicant. So my understanding from what you wrote, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you might have an applicant that doesn't necessarily have all of the kind of essential skills or favorable skills of that job role, but you see in them like, well, this person can really offer a good percentage of that, but they've got these other skills that can really like add to the organization, even in ways that we didn't foresee through this job. So I wonder like how common that is, that you'll be hiring for a job and be actually tweaking it because you recognize this is a candidate we really want to hire. And how does that work in practice?
It happens gradually and it happens naturally. And again, going back to building a team, you want to build a team of people who are talented, who work hard, who offer lots and lots of different tools, in your box. And if I'm interviewing somebody who I can see is really, really talented and I really want them on board, but I'm pretty confident there might be a few bits of the role they can't do, I will then have a think about it, see if there's anybody else in the organisation that might be able to take those parts of the role on, or might even just, shelf those bits of the role for now. So an example is that I might take somebody on to do a HR role, and I can see that they are extremely personable, sociable, emotionally intelligent, but maybe they haven't got the technical skills to introduce, the intranet that we're going to develop with the online training package. That's okay. Maybe I'll just leave that for later. Or maybe we'll get, somebody from our IT department to take that on and work very closely with that person. You can't expect an individual to be good at everything. And a lot of job descriptions have got everything on them. A really good example is teamwork. This is a standardized word that is shoved on every job description. It's like, well, everyone's got to be a team player and good at teamwork because they're going to be part of a team. And what you're saying, there is that, you need to be somebody who likes socializing and getting on with loads of people. And, not everybody does, and that's not a big problem. And why is it on there? There's these standard terms and there's this expectation that everybody's got to be good at everything. And, I think you can just get carried away when you're writing job descriptions and you think, oh, they can do that and they can do that and they can do that. So just think about what the essence of the role is and what the essence of the best person is going to be. Don't try and fit everyone into every single box, as it's not going to happen. They're not going to be happy if they've got a job that, that they're unconfident in, where they're asked to do tasks that they know they're not interested in, that they know they're not good at. That will make them feel insecure. So you can job carve, you can knock bits out of those job descriptions. There's no rules that says you can't do that.
It's also an inefficient way to run a business, I think, as well, to have people doing things that aren't in their strengths, they're not particularly passionate about, and because they're not going to be enthused about it, so their morale will be potentially lower, and they're not going to be potentially that good at it as well.
You can tailor make the role for the person, absolutely. There was a really great government scheme happening recently, which paid the employer to take somebody on that was facing barriers to work. So there was no risk to you. You took someone on for a year, their role was paid. And as a charity, that was great for us because, whenever we took someone new on, it was a lot of money that we would need to raise on an ongoing basis to be able to provide them with ongoing work. And so when that was offered, it was great because we could take on a lot of people and assess them in the job and then create a role for them. Now, that's not feasible for a lot of businesses, but, I think large organisations with lots of different roles, I'm sure that, and I'm sure some of them do this already, but I'm sure that it will be possible to move people around once they're in, I think that's really important. Yeah. If someone comes in as a frontline care assistant, but actually they're super talented in communications, the organisation would do, the right thing to do is to find those people and give them the opportunity to move around and carve their roles. They'll be happier. You'll be a better organisation.
Given what you just said, do you consider it a skill of yours to be able to be in an interview situation and be assessing that person, not so strictly to the criteria of the questions, but also getting a sense of who they are as a person and what they might be good at beyond necessarily exactly what they're saying and the role that you're hiring for?
Yeah, I mean, I love people, and I always have, and I love the brain, and I love finding out about what makes people tick and psychology, and so I love actually meeting people and finding out about them. So for me, I would say that I'm pretty good at that, and I think a lot of good leaders are. They surround themselves with good people. That's a common thing you hear all the time, isn't it? But But I would hope that you know, in my work, that I've just managed to try to create a very relaxed atmosphere. The whole recruitment process is chilled out and relaxed, and that's the only way really you're going to get to find out about your candidate, is by helping them to be themselves. So I think I've just realised that you can make some really big mistakes at the recruitment, in the recruitment phase, and I've hired people that haven't been right. I've hired people that have been brilliant performers, but that haven't worked out in the job. But my God, they give good interviews, And I think from getting it wrong, I've learned a lot as well. If you just go on that one interview, if you go on that 40-minute slot, you can't really judge people under those kind of conditions. You can't judge them because it's too formulaic. I've learned by getting it wrong as well as getting it right.
Okay, so moving now into when you've hired someone, they're in the job, they're in place. In the article, you mentioned tailored job roles and practices like job carving to match individual strengths and preferences. So, what's job carving, and how would that work in practice?
Well, the first time I ever heard about job carving was when I was working at Mencap, which is an organisation that supports people with a learning disability. So just to put on, medical model hats, a learning disability is a disability whereby an individual's IQ is 70 or below. I'm not going to get into whether, what I think about the IQ system. I'm not going to get into that, but somebody with an IQ of 70 or below is deemed to have a learning disability. And it was widely accepted that, people with learning disability could never work. All the way I was growing up, people with learning disabilities did not work. There couldn't be anything that they were capable of out there. Because, to do any role, you need to be able to read the health and safety policy. You need to be able to read and understand your employment contract. You need to go on staff training that would be too difficult for them to understand, etc., etc. These were all the kind of barriers to work for people with a learning disability, never mind the interview process and everything. You had all these other struggles whilst in work. And when we were at Mencap, we had what we called supported employment facilities, and so they were all kind of in-house, and it was quite common when I was growing up that people with a learning disability were given pretend jobs to do. So they would be housed in sort of warehouses and told to unpack pins and then pack them again. It was all very, very bizarre. And then later on, some real work initiatives started to happen. And people like Asda and Tesco's and Morrison's were the first real organisations where we managed to place people with a learning disability. And what we managed to do was to carve out some of the jobs that needed to do in the supermarkets that people with a learning disability were capable of, such as clearing boxes away, moving trolleys around the car park, cleaning things, stacking shelves, stuff like that. So it's really, really basic tasks that could be done by them. Now, before we came along, those roles were given to people. So maybe the checkout staff would be required to get rid of the boxes. The person clearing up the trolleys also had warehouse duties where they needed to follow lists and things like that. So we went to the organisation, we pulled out those tasks that we knew someone with a learning disability could do, and we would create a job description, a bespoke job description for that individual. So taking this to the extreme, really, that's what we were doing. We were working with people who traditionally would have been thought of as being impossible to employ. And actually, it worked really, really well. And it was the first step on the ladder, really, for people with a learning disability to start to gain work in the real world, in industry. And there's no reason that you can't do that for anybody. So I'm talking about people there who aren't able to read and write very well. You're going to get people who can read and write extremely well, but who can't perhaps be around other people. There might be a bit in their role that is about working with the general public. Maybe on Wednesdays they need to man reception because all the administrators do one day on reception. That doesn't have to be there. And if that person is struggling, you can just carve that out and move it over, and maybe have one receptionist role for somebody who likes outward-facing stuff. So yeah, again, it's about that fluidity of roles and tasks. It's about not being afraid to move things around and really thinking about this job, what it entails, what kind of person is going to be able to do these bits, and yeah, I think that role within the supermarket that was created, it was the first step on the ladder, and because people with a learning disability were then enabled to do that and shone and really shone at doing that, because first time they'd been offered work and so enthusiastic and happy to be there, worked extremely hard, started to get other roles within the organisation. So yeah, that's really where job carving came about. And it works really well, particularly in the big organisations.
Is that something that you've implemented at the Brain Charity or Drake Music or other previous employers?
Yeah, absolutely. We would often pull together roles specifically for individuals that we'd met. We would often split roles and change roles to suit people already in the organisation. We created roles for people that we knew were going to really, really thrive at doing that particular thing. Yeah, and I've taken people on that have got, maybe they've had a history in exercise and sport, and you can see that they love that, but it's quite an unusual role that they've had before. So they've lost that role, so they've come to our organisation to do maybe supported employment, but that their passion is sport. So, eventually when something comes up that's sport related in the organisation, you tap them on the shoulder and say, here you go, because that's where they're going to perform the best.
Do you think of the onus being on the managers, on the leads, or is it on the employees to kind of speak to like where their strengths are and what potential roles maybe they would thrive more in?
I think it's all about the culture. I think the leadership team are the ones that set the culture, but your HR team need to be empowered to become more fluid in their work. Often you'll hear someone describe themselves as being a HR professional, and what they're saying really is that I understand all of the policies, the procedures, the legislation, the structures, the rules around HR. But what you want is a creative person in that role. You want someone who just rips all that up, and obviously you've got to be legally compliant, but apart from that, you can do anything you want really.
So again in the piece you talk about creating neuro-inclusive workspaces and providing flexible work arrangements. I think you mentioned this article came out like right after the pandemic or like towards the end. So I think you reference what you did during the pandemic, but I'm curious, maybe you can mention that, but what for you is an accessible workplace for neurodivergent people, and what some examples of flexible work arrangements that can benefit the needs of neurodivergent employees are?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, if you look at work patterns, so this is like number one in terms of creating the right environment for some people. 9 to 5 works well for a lot of people, but it doesn't work well for everybody. And if you've got someone who's great, who works really hard, who you trust, actually, you should be able to manage it in a way. If they've got the kind of role that doesn't depend on, interaction with the rest of the team, for instance, you should be able to say to them, you work when you want, just make sure you work your hours. but you do them when you want. So that's one extreme. Others are, a lot of people are better in the mornings than they are in the afternoon. A lot of people get fatigued by the afternoon. So, if they want to start at 7 or 6, then that's fine. What's the problem with that, So there's the work pattern itself. There's the place of the person where they are doing the work. Obviously, if you're a machinist, you need to be next to your machine. If you are an office worker, you could work from home or you could work in the office. Now, if we take an office, your average office, it's laid out, desks, maybe a certain distance apart, and in quite a structured way. Again, some people will thrive in that kind of environment, some people won't. Some people will like a bit of a more private space because they might get distracted. And if we think about people with ADHD, for instance, working in a very stimulating environment can be very distracting. And if you want to help them focus, putting them in the middle of a busy office is not the best thing to do. So you need to offer a variety of workspaces, I would say. And if you can, having different levels of lighting in different parts of the office, different levels of sound, different amounts of social interaction. I would try to break things up. So having this regimented desks, one in front of the other, like an exam, now split it all up, have different types of workspace, and let the person choose their workspace and let them design it if possible as well. If they're there during your refurbishment, if they're on board during the refurbishment, engage your employees in the refurbishment, ask them what they would like, not just what kind of chair do you want, what kind of desk do you want, but where do you want it, what do the colours look like on the wall. It's their space, allow them to design it. What you can't do, and this is what a lot of classrooms are trying to do at the moment, is provide one type of environment that suits everyone. That doesn't work. Having lights that you can dim is great for somebody that struggles with sensory overload, but as soon as you put a visually impaired person in that space, you're going to have a problem for that visually impaired person. So different places, different spaces.
Neurodivergent people are doing all sorts of different jobs, but I think that a lot of potentially the people with that find it challenging to get work are potentially working at places that actually are either less willing or less able to make adjustments like we just spoke about. So just going back to a supermarket, like a supermarket on the shop floor can't necessarily or doesn't necessarily have these different zones of lighting or noise. Like I remember, I used to work prefer working in the back. It's darker, there's less people, and it's quieter. On the storefront, it's very bright lights, there's lots of people, and you can't there's noise, and I wasn't allowed to wear headphones. I still did secretly, but you weren't meant to.
I was visiting a school for autistic children recently, and one of the teachers was describing a young man who really wanted to be a chef, and he'd gone on work experience, and they were talking to him now about the fact that he's not going to be able to become a chef because he can't wear his headphones in the kitchen for health and safety reasons, which again I just questioned that straight away. And they said, well, if there's a fire, how are they going to, hear the fire alarm going off? And it was just all of this overthinking about it, I think most people nowadays, if they saw somebody with headphones on at work, they would think, actually, has this person got autism? A lot of people would think that.
Yeah, I think thinking of my example, I didn't know necessarily why I like to wear headphones. I wasn't wearing the kind of big kind of noise blocker. I was listening to music, but that kind of is something I want to hear that also blocks out the exterior. That is somehow less acceptable than wearing something that looks like it's for a serious medical purpose, like with heavy. And I don't love the idea of having to say, well, I'm autistic, and so this helps block out this and that, because not everyone has that knowledge of themselves or wants to disclose that, or even embody that identity. Maybe this just helps you and that's why you're doing it organically. And from my perspective, if it's not negatively affecting you doing the role, which it wasn't. It was actually probably motivating me more and making it more comfortable. Why do I need to kind of validate it with some kind of labor condition?
I mean, I think the manager or whoever it was, the supervisor that made the decision for you not to wear your headphones, was just reverting back to what happens in the classroom. We're not allowed to chew gum in the classroom. You're not allowed to wear headphones. You're not allowed to do these things. So you're not allowed to do them at work either. And there's just no reason for it. It's just, just daft. But yeah, that's a really great example of how to upset your neurodivergent staff members by not letting them just do something simple like wearing a pair of headphones. It's not a big deal. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about different ways in terms of like creating environments, physical environments to make people feel comfortable and accommodated. And we've talked about ways that you can support people to be doing the type of work that they thrive at. I wonder, in a kind of greater sense, what you've done or what you've experienced in terms of like a company culture, the organizational culture, to create sorry to overuse this word, a culture, an environment where people feel collectively like they are supported and included.
Yeah, I mean, it starts at the top, and if you are a neurodivergent leader, if you are a leader that has mental health issues, if you are a leader that's face barriers, be open about that. Talk to your staff about it. Don't hide it. If your staff members are aware that the people in charge are able to express their vulnerabilities, then they will be able to express their own. They'll feel safe doing it. The first barrier to helping anybody is to get them to tell you about it. If you work in an organisation whereby vulnerabilities are preyed upon, then no one's going to talk about it. They're going to hide it. If you work in an organisation where the chief exec is saying, I've got dyslexia, I'm rubbish at spelling, don't judge me on it, then they're going to feel much more comfortable themselves, So it starts at the top. I would encourage any organisation that is, wanting to start to look at neurodiversity within their organisation. If there are leaders, senior managers who are neurodivergent, start your training sessions with having that manager sit at the front and tell everyone about it. Or if they're autistic, get them to write their story down and put that in the newsletter. As soon as you do that, everybody else will go, it's okay that I'm like this. They're not going to judge me on it because they're like that too. I've seen that happen in really big organisations, universities, where the leaders have come out and said, oh, I've got a mental health issue and this is how I deal with it. And sometimes I don't deal with it really well, but this is me. And you just, this ripple effect, this beautiful ripple effect where everybody relaxes then. And once you start talking about your needs, you can then start to get them sorted out, can't you? And I've actually run meetings where I've taken maybe a big influx of new people in, and I've said, we're going to go around the table now and talk about, our neurological conditions or mental health issues, or anything anybody wants to talk about, really. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you want to, let people know what support you need, anything you want, really. So we go around the table and someone will say, well, I've got MS and that means this about me. And someone else say, well, I'm dyslexic. I'm sometimes good at this, but I'm not very good at that. And we went around the table, and some people didn't say anything. And again, it was the opportunity to let your team members know that you do struggle in this area. So, if you can offer me a bit of help, that would be brilliant. And it's just about, humans being humans and being open, and the leadership team being committed to that openness by being open themselves.
Do you think like that you maybe being criticized or found it challenging in relation to certain aspects of being dyslexic / neurodivergent, like enables you to have more empathy and patience for those that have challenges that might be different to yours, but you can recognize like, well, it might be different, but I also have challenges, and it kind of opens up that empathy that maybe there's leaders that don't have anything that people are particularly critical of, or that they feel is a challenge that they can't relate to the challenges of someone different to them. And I wonder like how those type of leaders can kind of develop that empathy without having that lived experience of being criticized or finding something challenging that is a challenge that maybe the majority don't face, that they do.
No, I mean, there will be leaders out there who don't care about people. There'll be leaders out there who don't care how happy their staff are. So the way that I would talk to those leaders is by saying to them, if you want to make more money, you need to have a happy, talented team. And, whether you like it or not, this is what you need to do to make them happy. They might not have any empathy. They might not understand, and there are lots of psychopaths who run organisations, and, they perhaps don't think about other people's feelings, but they do think about the bottom line, and the bottom line is influenced by the productivity of the staff. And in most organisations, it's the staff that are the greatest tool the leader has got. They can only achieve what they want to achieve through the people that work for them. And if you want them to be as productive as possible, they need to really want to be there. They need to really enjoy it. And they will work their socks off. Because, most of us love to achieve, love work. We like contributing. So, yeah, I think, this makes good business sense. Having a neurodiverse team makes good business sense. There's no doubt about it. And I think that is the currency in which we would have to communicate with those kind of leaders.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nanette.
Thank you. I've enjoyed myself again, Sam. I love these sessions, yeah. But it really helps me to consolidate my thinking about things as well, because you often ask me questions that I've not really thought about before, but yeah, it's great.
All right, that was my interview with Nanette Mellor, part 2. I hope you found it informative and interesting, and there were some ideas in there that maybe you hadn't considered or align with challenges that you maybe have experienced, and it's nice to hear others recognize those and want to see changes made. I think it's upon us all in the small ways that we can, if we feel capable and we have the agency, and to try and shift some of the working practices that aren't working for neurodivergent people and all people who feel potentially marginalised in employment in general. So, thank you. New episode coming soon. Again, please do subscribe and share this episode and the project at large, and I'll see you next time.